Dirty Bastard comes when I'm on stage, and he's not me.
In the Wu-Tang, he was the soul. And when he left, it was a big loss for us.
He came to my office with his welfare card and said, I want this to be my album cover. He was very self-aware of the character he was portraying.
People think drugs were making him paranoid. It turned out that he was correct. There's a 95-page FBI file on Wu-Tang.
The government is on us. Dirt was ahead of his time on it.
Thank you so much for joining us on the pod.
Of course.
Jason Pollard, a esteemed editor who now has a new title, co-director of the film Old Dirty Bastard, The Tale of Two Dirties. This is really exciting for me, especially. Some of our listeners might know my background. You know, I struggled to make my transition from assistant editing into editing, and eventually was able to land my dream job editing on Wu-Tang and American Saga. So my connection to the Wu is very deep, and of course loved this documentary. I mean, I've been waiting a long time to see this story come to life. Jason's background, he's been around the film industry for a long time, really since you were a kid, accompanying your father, who is an acclaimed film producer and editor, Sam Pollard, also a professor at NYU. And I also had the privilege of being under the tutelage of your father back when I was in Singapore.
Nice.
He inspired me. He was one of the first teachers that I had who really made me solidify my path into editing.
Cool.
So I've always been grateful to him and very inspired by him and his journey beyond editing. I mean, he has done so many roles in the industry as a producer, director, writer, and of course, famously as one of Spike Lee's editors. That's an amazing way to start your career journey. Of course, you went to NYU as well, followed your father's footsteps there. And now my understanding is you're teaching at NYU. So you've had quite a journey already. And I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It has been a journey. When I initially started out, my dad and others remind me, I initially didn't want to be an editor. Seeing what my dad had done, obviously super proud of him. Admired his career a lot, but when I was a younger kid, I didn't want that pressure. So initially I wanted to do something with computers. So I actually went to Morehouse College in Atlanta first, and I studied computer science. And I did that for about one semester. And I realized at the end of the semester that maybe computer science wasn't for me. And, it was kind of kismet, or it was coincidence or whatever, that my roommate at the time, a gentleman by the name of Derek Cameron, was a huge film lover, film buff, and wanted to get into the film career. So that freshman year in Morehouse, while I'm doing computer science, I'm talking to him about film. We're going back and forth, we're watching movies, and that bond we formed over films, it kind of reignited my passion to kind of get into editing. I eventually transferred from Morehouse, as you said, to NYU undergrad, to continue film TV. And while I was doing that, I was basically editing and cutting anything I could get my hands on, because I felt like I had kind of a late start. So while I was at NYU, I was, if you remember, I was learning Avid, the old school Avid, the box. It used to be a separate piece of hardware.
That's right, the Avid.
That's right, the actual Avid. We had I think it was Final Cut Pro 1, which was the first version. When I was first going there, that was the brand new editing software. It was on a CD. But, as I said before, I learned both of those systems. And then, I was cutting everything possible, whether it be student films, student documentaries. I cut a mockumentary. I was cutting music videos, because I felt like I need, and I still feel this way, to really get my editing chops up, I had to get as many reps as possible, right? As many, cracks at the ball, at times up at plate as possible to really enhance my skills. And all along the way, I'm reading Murch, I'm reading Ralph Rosenblum, I'm reading all these editing books, you're smiling. So, when the shooting stops, right? I'm reading stuff, I'm watching the stuff, I'm trying to immerse myself in this whole editing business. And, I think it worked, So by the time I graduated, I had made enough connections, and obviously, and I always find my career journey unique, obviously, because of who my dad is. So I don't tell people to aspire or follow my footsteps, because you can't, obviously. right? You don't have a dad who has 30 plus years in the industry.
That's kind of the elephant in the room. Anytime someone's going to talk to you early on, is like, well, we know how you got here.
Right.
But I'm curious, did that ever work against you? Was that ever a challenge that you had to overcome of like proving that you're not your dad or that
Yeah.
have something else to offer?
It's always internal, right? I think I put the pressure on myself internally to say it's two things. It's one, to prove, well, to uphold the last name and not embarrass my dad. That keeps me up at night. And then two, but you're right, two, to kind of make my own lane, improve on my own filmmaker, my own editor. And that's kind of harder to do because he's been such a huge influence on my life and my editing style. I cut just like the guy. It's hard to get the difference. And it's always going to be there. But I understood that going into the business. I just had to, you just have to tell yourself, certain, like, this is what it is. This is the last name. This is how it's going to be. And I made my peace with it years ago. I mean, does it still drive me to do better? Of course it does. So after graduating from NYU, through knowing who he was and some connections I had made, I got a job as an assistant editor on a feature-length documentary called The Hip Hop Project. And that was my first big-time job. And, I was just it was cut on Avid, and I was doing all the stuff that, assistants do, log. At that time, it was actually digitized. So I was digitizing beta tapes, then logging footage, then putting together sequences and string outs for the director, who was also the editor. So it was the director-editor working on it. And it was really interesting because, like I said, it was a feature-length doc. So I was really into, I was thrown into a feature-length workflow. And I was also able to see and the director's name is Matt Ruskin, great director. I was also able to see how Matt was doing all these really interesting, innovative things while filming. He was shooting with like Super 16. He was putting steady cams on the artists. He was doing all these different these lighting things. And it was just a really fascinating project and a great project to really cut your teeth on because it was just so creative. And the story was so interesting that, I thank Matt, and I still thank Matt to this day for giving me that shot on that film. And that lasted about a year. And then, I just went on to other jobs as an AE, honestly. I did some TV. It was mostly TV. And then finally, I luckily got the shot where my dad saw that I was doing the AE work and he gave me a shot to edit or to co-edit a documentary called Slavery by Another Name for PBS. And then once I was able to do that, that was officially my transition from AE to editor, because of his help. And then once I started doing that, and that was a show for PBS, and that, I had to learn how to cut, PBS style and PBS structure. Once I did that, I was kind of off and running. And I should go back because before Slavery by Another Name, there's another professor of mine named Jim Brown, who also taught at NYU, professor, mentor, a friend of my dad. And he also gave me a shot, first as an AE for some projects he had worked on. He mostly worked on music documentaries. But then he gave me a chance to co-edit a documentary called Pete Seeger, The Power of Song with my dad. My dad had done the first cut, and then I came, it just did changes. I had a director and producer behind me in the edit room, and we just did multiple changes. And, and with the Harry Belafonte, we also worked on a Harry Belafonte doc called Sing Your Song. Again, as an editor, not the primary editor, a woman named Suzanne Rostock, who was the lead editor and director of that. And again, just getting my chops as an editor in documentaries. And really, to me, it's always Slavery by Another Name, which is my first quote unquote big doc. It's a TV doc for PBS. And again, learning the PBS style, act structure, how to structure something out from a paper cut. How to work with stills, how to work with recreations, etc., music. We did all of that. And, Slavery by Another Name down to Sundance. So that was great going with my dad to Sundance. And, since then, it's just been one doc after the next. I'm a freelance editor, meaning that I'm not sure when my next job or what my next job is going to be. Once you establish yourself as either an assistant or as an editor, you start to get job offers rolling in. It just happens. It's a kind of a magical thing, I guess, or not magical. Maybe it's just networking. But people email you, hey, we got this job, are you free? You transition from I need to find a job to really weighing out what job should I take? What job will best help my career? Or what job interests me? What themes interest me? And that's kind of just guided me throughout, and that's just led me to, eventually to where I'm at now, where after, more than a few years of editing documentaries, I decided, you know what, I think I want to challenge myself and try to transition into directing. And again, the same way as I was intentional about being an editor, I was intentional about being a director, meaning that I let people know. I think honestly, I learned this from Optimize Yourself and Zach. You gotta let people know what you're trying to do with your career, because we don't, they'll just assume you want to stay in the position that you're at. So I let people know that hey, I'm interested in directing. Let a gentleman by the name of Sasha Jenkins, who directed the Wu-Tang doc of Mics and Men, who we've collaborated on a couple of projects, and said, hey, I'm trying to direct, just let me know. I let another gentleman by the name of Steve Revo know, hey, we worked on the Rick James doc with Sasha. I'm trying to direct. And again, because I let people know and I put I was intentional about the move I wanted to make. My dad, then knowing I wanted to direct, said, hey, I have an opportunity to, direct an ODB doc. I don't know much about ODB, him being a slightly older gentleman, but he said, I'm sure you know about him and you know about the Wu-Tang Clan. So I said, of course. And just like you, Mark, when I heard ODB, I jumped at the chance, to do it. I missed out on the chance of working on the Wu-Tang doc with Sasha of Mics and Men. So to work on an ODB doc was a dream. So
you landed in sort of a lane of music documentaries.
That's right.
Did you grow up with a musical ear? Is this happenstance? Was this something that you wanted to go down?
It kind of just happened, man. To be honest with you, I mean, I grew up with, like most people, with music in the house. My mom played, old R&B and soul stuff in the 60s every Saturday morning. My dad played jazz, old jazz, Miles, Monk, Coltrane, every time he would drive me someplace. So that music was always there. But, and I try to play saxophone poorly, clarinet poorly, piano poorly. But, as a 90s baby, I loved hip hop, right? Loved those early 90s New York hip hop. That's my thing. Like I said, the first job was Hip Hop Project, which was about a not-for-profit organization that got kids in by saying, do you want to create your own hip hop album? And then by getting them in with that promise, they also told them a whole bunch of life lessons. And then, like I said, my mentor, my former professor, Jim Brown, he is a music doc person. So I would say that's the main person that got me into it, because, Jim person who taught me the lesson, if you have a lane, stay in it and excel in that lane. And his lane is folk music documentaries. And I knew nothing about folk music until I met him. But, again, I learned about Pete Seeger, the Weavers, Dylan. I knew about Dylan, but, the folk fest, the Newport Folk Festival, all that stuff was just working on all these docs with Jim. And, and that kind of, because I worked on Pete Seeger and Belafonte, that kind of led me on that music doc route. And I love music docs, man. They're fun.
They are fun. Yeah, it's my favorite type of documentary to watch, is learning about musicians.
Exactly.
And on the Rick James documentary, you actually got your first writing credit. So that how did that come about?
I don't know, man. They just gave it to me. It's interesting with doc. I kind of want to say the doc editor, I should get a writing credit on all this stuff.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah,
because even if they give you a paper cut, on most things I've worked with, and each director is different, right? So if they give you a paper cut, some directors want you to adhere to the paper cut exactly as is. But most directors want you to deviate from it and put your own, your own 2 cents, your own creative spin on it. So we're always writing. And usually, even with the verite stuff, we're digging in, getting the moments. With interviews and transcripts, I'm digging in the transcript and figuring out, okay, this bite works here, this bite will work here, this bite will work here. So with Rick James, I didn't ask for the writing credit, but again, Sasha is I've worked with Sasha on a couple of projects, so he was good enough to do that. He was generous enough to give me that writing credit. But I would say my the way the way I worked, the workflow still the same, right? I looked at all the footage, looked at all the interviews, made my selects. Me and then my really good assistant editor, really co-editor, Chris Bravo, we put our index cards on the board for a 3-act structure, and away you go, man. So
You had mentioned that you were interested in directing for a long time. And you had expressed that, which is really important. But I'm still curious, did anyone ever doubt that you could do it, or did anyone give you any? I'm just sort of wondering, like, what did you have to overcome to finally get the opportunity?
I wouldn't say no one ever doubts you, but I will say that I'm pigeonholed, right? So I'm primarily seen as a doc music editor. That's
Right.
and most people probably they won't say to me out loud, but they think that's the only thing I can do. And it's not so much with directing, it's actually editing I've gotten the most rejection for. Like when I tried to apply to edit ABC News, and they at first said, you can't edit news. I'm looking at your resume, you can't edit news. Like, see, you're making a face. Yeah, of course, right?
You've literally done that.
But people say because news is a whole, it's a different format
Yeah.
and a different thing. People say you can't edit news. Or I there was a job I really wanted as an editor. I won't say the job, right? But I really wanted the gig. So I knew it would, Mark, when you see a job, and you're like, okay, this job's gonna make some noise. This job's gonna hit it.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, I gotta get on this one. In this job, when they reached out to me, I said, uh-oh, this is the one. And I applied, and then I didn't hear anything. And when I finally heard back, they said, "Yeah, you went with a different person. You don't have enough verite experience in your resume." And I'm like, oh my God, But that's what happens. You get pigeonholed as an editor. So as a director, it wasn't so much people were rejecting me. I think what I found is that people want me to direct and edit. They want the 2-for-1 package. That's what
one price tag.
It's either you direct or edit on your own and you show that to people, or you find that one person who believes, and that's tough.
Like you were saying, you went after this job, they wouldn't even interview you.
Right.
You didn't even have an opportunity to explain to them that you would be the right fit for this project, that you knew deep down that this was the project you would be good at.
Right.
One of those biggest blocks is just getting that opportunity to express yourself to someone.
I find it's just endless networking, endless determination, endless just positivity. You got to be not so much endless, but relentless with it. And it's easier said than done. It really is.
You're a very positive person, I can already tell. Like you bring a certain joy and energy into everything you're talking about. So I think that definitely comes across and is contagious.
Thank you.
It made me think, as I was watching this documentary about Dirty, and he's having this moment where he realizes he has to put on this different character. Did you ever feel like that was something you had to kind of change how you presented yourself when you chose, like, I'm going to have a different career? And I mean, similarly, now that you're transitioning to directing, is it something that you're like, okay, I have to sort of change how people perceive me?
Definitely. I think we're attracted to editing because there's a kind of introverted nature to editors in general, and for the most part, because we're willing to sit in the dark room or our office by ourselves for hours and hours on end, trying to figure out a puzzle, trying to tell a story, right? Trying to deliver for an invisible audience. And that's a very solitary lifestyle. And and look, I had to figure out as an editor how to make people comfortable. And I kind of always knew that because, from early on, I've always had, back in the pre-pandemic days, I always had a director or producer over my shoulder, looking at stuff. And I had to be comfortable sitting in a chair, showing cuts, talking to them, not just about the cut, but their day and all that other kind of stuff. Really getting the interaction going so we could have a decent working relationship. And that's changed somewhat with Zoom, because we can still do sessions over Zoom, but that connection is lost a little bit. But yeah, I did have to change to be just a friendlier person, just a more open person, more receptive, warmer to ideas, not so quick to shut people off. One of the very things I cut was a music video for an artist, and I was doing it with a good friend of mine, and we're just two young guys in our 20s, and we're cutting the music video. And he comes to me one day and he says, well, the client who was a member of the band I was cutting this video for, they want to come by. And I was cutting in my dad's office at NYU. They want to come by the office to take a look at the cut. And in my arrogance, I say, I think I was 23, 24. I go, I don't meet with clients. Nobody comes in the edit room. Nobody comes in my edit room. This is my sanctuary. And I literally tell that to my friend, and he tells that to the client.
This is my sanctuary. I love it.
And you can imagine, Mark, what the response was. It wasn't pleasant.
No.
And eventually he did come into the room, and eventually he did his changes. And I learned from that day, hey man, I can't be on this exalted plane over here. I gotta be down to earth. The client, I mean, I don't think they paid me much, but even they're not paying you much, they deserve that respect.
Yeah.
What I realized I had to incorporate into my editing and even to directing a little bit is that I'm at the service of the director. I have a lot of opinions, but in the true sense of collaboration, look, at the end of the day, I'm trying to fulfill the director's vision. Even the director doesn't know what the vision is, and a lot of times they don't. I'm
especially
trying
in
to
documentary, I'm sure.
especially in documentary,
figuring it out. Yeah,
we're figuring it out together. But we're figuring, and that's the fun part of the process. We're figuring it out together. How do we make this work? How do we tell the story in the best way possible that fulfills your creative vision? And then, obviously that changes as a director because, I learned quickly that, I'm not the ultimate boss. Obviously, with the Tale of Two Dirties, I'm answering to A&E. I'm answering to Pulse. I'm answering to the family. So these are three people that I'm answering to that have different expectations and different requirements. And I think as a director, it was just, the different skill set was just managing those expectations. But I'll tell you honestly, as a director, I did feel more empowered to disagree and to kind of try to, quote unquote, put my foot down in the most gentlest way possible. As editors, we just sit back and say, this sucks. And this is, why'd you shoot it like that? And what'd you do that for? Oh, God. If
I could do better than this. What is this?
Exactly. But then you realize as director, right, now I'm dealing with the limitations of budget, the limitations of schedule, trying to get, a certain number of interviews in, not going into overtime with the crew. Now I'm having conversations with the DP every day. DP's in my ear saying this, that, and the third. Producers in my other ear saying a lot of stuff. And how do you balance all that stuff out? And that's still a skill set I have to learn, where I'm like, still get my vision across, but work now in collaboration, like I said, with the budget, with the DP, with the producer, with the network, and still try to nail it, which is super hard, very hard. And I've gained a newfound respect for all the directors I've worked with, because it's a tough balance.
Had your dad ever prepped you as far as these are the things that you're going to be dealing with that you never had to? You just kind of got thrust into it?
I got thrust into it. It's the same editing. My dad doesn't, I love him, but he doesn't prep me for any of this stuff.
Well, that's life, right? I mean,
that's life. You just got to,
you can't really.
Yeah, you got to just experience it for yourself. So now, and the thing that I'll do, and the great thing about my dad is that I'll have a challenge and I'll go back to him and I say, this is the challenge that I'm having. And then he'll give me his advice, which is always fantastic because he's gone through it. So, as editor, the scene doesn't work. Take a look at it. What do you think? Oh, this. Okay, thanks. As a director, one challenge was I couldn't get a person comfortable. And I remember I was on set and I just called him. I said, hey, I can't get this person comfortable. I'm freaking out. He gave me his advice. I dealt with this. Did you try this? Did you try this? Did you try this? And it was just, the process was the same, I'm trying to get this, how would you approach this day where I'm trying to shoot on one side of Queens, then we got to go to Brooklyn, and we got to do it within a 10-hour span, or I'll try to shoot this, and this. And he was there through Zoom through most of the interviews where he was just saying, that was good, this was good, maybe hone in on this question, go back to this question, they didn't do this so well. So that's where his advice is really crucial.
So was Sam's involvement as a co-director more working with you and conveying these ideas of you, okay, that we should adjust this, or was he also participating with the guests?
It was more with me.
Right. So you were kind of in charge of like making the guests comfortable and managing the crew, and a lot of that fell on your shoulders.
The DP has worked with him a number of times. A gentleman by the name of Henry. Producer was actually a former student of his, Jessica. So that was cool. And then he's always, he's the liaison between what I'm trying to do in the network. And, obviously the network and the production company feel comfortable when he's on the Zoom and, assuring people everything's running smoothly. I was like overly eager. I always said yes. You know how when you start out, you always say yes to everything. Can you do it? Of course. Can you do 10 interviews? Of course I can. Sure. And
yeah, of course I can do anything that you want me to do. Yeah, no problem.
It's that eagerness to show, because like anything, when you start off on a new role, you just want to. It's the proving ground, man. You cut that first scene of Wu-Tang. I know you're like, yeah, I'm gonna cut the hell out the scene. I'm gonna show these guys. I know this. I'm the right guy for the job. Here we go. It's like that with everything.
Cutting that first scene, you're like, oh, I'm a failure. Oh, what am I doing? Oh, exactly. They've made a mistake. No, I never felt quite like that, but definitely my first episode, there was a lot of pressure. I mean, I understand that feeling when you're stepping into new territory. It can feel, I mean, you need your ego to kind of help you get through it.
That's right.
So I mean, you had a lot of incredible interviews from Mariah and Ghost and Raekwon. I mean, they're really shedding their hearts. I mean, in particular, ODB's sister, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a very emotional moment that really stayed with me. And I was so shook. Yeah. And on the opposite side of it, knowing how the sausage gets made, I'm just like, wow, like she really felt comfortable eventually. I don't know how you got there, but that was really remarkable. Tell us about that.
Not to make it sound simple, but it's literally just talking to people. ODB's sister, she was very nervous about being on camera. She was very jittery. And when somebody comes into the room with that energy, it kind of throws you off a little bit because they're so nervous, you get nervous. So, she came in and I interviewed his brother earlier that day. She came into the location and she was super nervous. So we just, before we even started shooting, and the person from the estate had given me a heads up and said she's going to be nervous. She doesn't feel comfortable talking. And he told me, just talk to her. So, I wasn't pushy. I just said, hey, how you doing? This is what we're trying to do. And I really forget what the conversation was about. We just started talking. It was like little bits and pieces. I gave her a space and it was like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And you just talk, you just have a conversation. And I just try to say, this is where we're shooting. We're thinking about sending you here. You don't have to talk about anything you're not comfortable talking about. And I'm not, I didn't want to push her. I didn't want to feel like she's being exploited. This is just, again, going into the collaboration. This is a collaboration. You just tell the story about your brother. Just tell me a story. And then when the interview actually happened, she was, as you know, she was very emotional and she was very hesitant. And it's always, shout out to NYU, because the little student docs I did at NYU, I just learned how to really listen to people when you're interviewing them. And you kind of got to just play the emotion, ride the emotion. And it's tough. It's a hard thing to do. But I do enjoy doing it. It's tough, but I enjoy doing it. And with her, it was just riding that emotion and not pushing for that moment to happen. It just happened. I mean, the interview with Funk Master Flex, even though it came out great, that was the toughest interview I've ever done in my life, man.
No kidding.
He was tough. He starts off the interview, he goes, I don't like to talk about the old stuff. It makes me feel like a dinosaur. I don't like nostalgia. And it was rough. But the thing, with these guys is that, and this was the tricky part, I had to show them, to prove to them that I was a huge fan and I knew their stuff, right? Not to show off, but to be like, yeah. So like, when Flex came in, I would talk about, a couple of years ago, he did this July 4th mix. It was all 90s hip hop, old school stuff. And it was deep cuts that I was like, yo, you played this? And he was like, oh, okay, he gets it. Or when I did Stretch Armstrong, I was like, yo, Stretch, I'm part of your Patreon. stretching my beat. He was like, oh, okay. And then when you say stuff like that, like, oh, this guy, okay, he kind of knows what he's talking about. Okay,
Yeah.
now he can talk. Ghostface was tougher because, Raekwon were tough because I'm a huge Ghostface and Raekwon fan.
Exactly.
You can see why they're huge stars because when they sit in the chair, they bring this energy and aura. And I'm just there along for the ride.
When Ghost is talking about his style and what they were bringing as a group, what they were bringing to the game, but just like specifically talking about himself, and then you cut to the footage of him wearing these,
That's right.
elaborate outfits. Oh, it was just such like personality. You can
That's
really
right.
sense like he knows how to handle an interview
That's
better than
right.
anyone could direct him. You're right. I could just imagine you kind of leave him loose and he will give you gold.
That's right. And
He's
it's
just such
funny
a great
because
personality.
the editor in me, as he's saying that, what I was thinking, Mark. I'm like, that's going in. That's going in the cut. And I'm cutting to the footage of him with the robe.
Yeah, you already know what you're gonna do.
You already know what you're gonna do as soon as you hear it, because that's the way he's giving it to you. Raekwon too.
I was actually surprised, to be honest, that there's never been an ODB documentary, except for the fact that I'm aware, the estate is very protective of how he's going to be displayed and how his story gets told. How did you get this to happen?
I mean, it's really the estate, as you said. I'm really grateful to the estate because they had the footage, and they came to A&E and Impulse, and those two organizations already agreed to greenlight it based on the footage his wife had and their access to some of the artists. Anybody who's a fan of the Wu in the mid '90s can tell you about ODB and why they love him so much. I mean, it was a universal feeling.
Yeah, that was a really pivotal part of the documentary is detailing how they all seemed to know he was going to be the first.
Yeah.
He was the first who's going to have a solo deal. He's going to be the shepherd for the rest of the group to level up as solo artists because he just had that that I don't know, transitional quality about him. And I mean the Mariah thing was kind of fascinating, of course.
I mean,
teaming up with Mariah.
The great thing about it's just, I don't know if you remember, Mark, when they first came out, it was really him, it was ODB, and it was Method Man.
Method Man, yeah.
Those two guys stood out. Meth had his own solo joint already on the group song, but ODB's voice, the way as we try to explain in the documentary, his voice, the way he phrased lyrics, the way he would just use the onomatopoeia, and then his hand movements in the videos. And then his style.
His hair,
this guy was a superstar from the beginning. And the great thing about Mariah, the interview, what that revealed is that she understood that too from the very beginning. And she also, just like ODB was very planning, really planning his image and his sound, she knew, which is what was really great to hear, she knew that her sound and his sound would work. She had heard the SWV song before with the Wu, said, oh, that works. I can do something similar, and we'll have something special here. And it took a lot for to get him into the studio as she tells the story. But she had that foresight, and she had that intelligence and that brilliance to know this guy with this, and then we put him in a video like this, smash. It's gonna work. I know it's gonna work. And it did. And it did.
I loved that soundbite where he's talking about Old Dirty Bastard as a character. And it's not who he is, but over the course of fame and the drugs and all the kind of surrounding nature of what came with the success, he delved further and further down that part, like just kind of owned that part and became Old Dirty Bastard more than Russell Jones. Was that already, did you kind of know, okay, that's going to be our structure, or was this something that you figured out through listening?
It was something we discovered, or something, and something that we discovered with the research and then in the filmmaking. I think my goal was to figure out, okay, who was this guy behind the persona? Like you said, we all know about the wild antics, but who is the guy behind that? Is there a humanity behind that? And that's what I like to do with most, if I'm doing a doc film about a subject. Like you take Rick James, for instance. We know Rick James is a super freak, but what's behind that? Because obviously that's midlife and that's mid-career or whatever, and that's the thing that actually worked for him. Same thing with ODB. What makes him tick? And then exploring that and exploring his life story and upbringing, his parents, and where he came from in Brooklyn and how he started out, and him being, getting with RZA and GZA, his cousins. That's when we really started to discover these two sides of Russell Jones, ODB. And I knew about his involvement with the Nation of God's Nurse, the 5% Nation, but I really want to explore that as well. Because I wanted to say, okay, what's the transition to, what was the attraction to that? And then who was he once he embraced that philosophy, right? Once he embraced that culture of the gods and earths. And it was very interesting, right? And you see a person who's really scholarly, the rap professor, as Raekwon said, and really scientific. And also, this was just, just doing research, listening to different interviews that people had done about him over the years. The people saying, yeah, there was this different, there was a dichotomy. There was a different person before the old dirty bastard that the public came to know and love. There's a different person there. And then just again, through the interviews and through the research and through looking at the whole video footage, even when he finds all this famous success, there's still another person behind all of that, right? And it's, again, listening to interviews, there's 2 books about him that I read, so it's a lot of people just exploring the man behind the mask, if you will. So, that was, my goal was to dig into his past, but then the idea of 2 separate people kind of, came about as we were, filming in post. Because, I try to do it with somebody else and it didn't quite work. I worked on a shorter doc about the rapper Logic. And we tried to do the same sort of thing. It was Logic versus, I think his name is Bobby. And it was like, no, they're one and the same. But ODB, to me, to us, it was clearly, this was an image, right? This was a cultivated image until, unfortunately, right, the image and reality kind of collide, So that was that was the fascinating thing. Honestly, I listened to a podcast about ODB that I found, pretty distasteful, where they just were like, yeah, he did this, he did this, he was a lunatic, he was a this, he was a that. And obviously that's not the film I wanted to make, where it's just playing the hits, playing the lowlights and saying what a lunatic he was. No, that's...
Were there any interviews that you wish you were able to get that you weren't able to, or certain access? I mean,
I talked to Method Man recently. Talked to him recently. As I'm sitting there interviewing him, I'm like, I wish I could have gotten this guy. He's so magnetic, and he's such a good storyteller. I'm just like, oh, there were other members from the Wu I wish I could have gotten. As I watched the film, that's what's missing. Obviously RZA, I wish I had got, but they didn't want to talk. A lot of people didn't want to talk, unfortunately.
A lot of people didn't want to be part of it.
Yeah. But that's the main thing I miss. Other members of the Wu. That's what I miss. But it is what it is. We did the best we could.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful it exists. I'm grateful that the world gets to see this other side of of such a legend who's, on every t-shirt and poster everywhere.
So where did you get that record from in the background?
Record store day. Limited edition, return to the 36 chambers.
Nice.
I was very pleased. Yeah, I was sitting in this room last night and I was thinking, oh, I gotta put it out. I just have to, out of respect for ODB and for you. Yeah, it was a very special record for me as a kid, even. That was one of my entry points into Wu-Tang Clan, was watching him on the Grammys saying Wu-Tang is for the children. Like, Mom, see what he just said? And then of course she really didn't approve of it, but luckily for all of us, we find the music that we can. So yeah, man.
Man. And then and honestly, I know you worked on the show, but watching Wu-Tang and American Saga, man, you watch as much as you can and you do as much research as you can on these docs. So it was like, okay, how do they portray ODB?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you must have taken some cues from the Mikes and Men doc.
Yeah, definitely the Mikes and Men doc as well. Okay, how do they tell the story about him meeting with Iceland learned? Okay, that's how they. Okay, so this is the other. Okay, let's set some other beats and some other notes. Definitely.
Did you talk to Sasha at all about that
Oh yeah,
in
oh
particular?
yeah,
Yeah, leading into
oh yeah.
this. Yeah, for
Sasha
sure.
was able Sasha connected me with ODB's brother because he interviewed him for the Of Mice and Men doc. So
Oh, fantastic.
yeah, Sasha was just, like my dad, Sasha was integral. I consider Sasha a mentor, somebody I look up to as a filmmaker. So
Yeah, I
I
mean
was,
that's what I was just going to get into. I mean, mentorship seems to be like a crucial component to your
huge.
journey and so many of our journeys. And now you're doing some teaching at NYU, is that right?
That's right.
So you are now taking on a little bit of a mentorship role yourself and giving back to the
That's
next
right.
generation. What's that been like?
It's been super challenging, but ultimately rewarding. The co-editor on ODB is actually a young person, a young woman who was part of the Karen Schmier Editing Fellowship.
Oh, fantastic.
And she was in my group. And I saw Samantha Kahar, and I saw a short film she had done, I think as a student or maybe right after school. And this thing was amazing, man. It was amazing. It was a personal doc, but it was amazing. And the editing style was crazy. Like, it was great. Like, okay. So when I had a chance, I knew I needed help with the editing of the stop. I reached out to her and said, "Hey, what can we do to make this happen?" And we made it happen. And her energy, her editing intuitive in this, it it brought the film to another level. I know my style, I know what I'm attracted to, and I know my kind of quirks or what have you. But she thought and saw and approached the footage in a brand new way. So it's a giving, it's kind of it's giving and receiving. But NYU's, it's fun with the students. It's challenging because they don't listen all the time,
No, they don't.
which is a
None of us
challenge.
do.
But one student said to me at the end, "What did he write?" He said, "You know, I know we gave you a hard time, Professor, but I really did learn something. I'm interested in documentaries." And to be all schmaltzy, that makes it all worth it.
And it
Even
does make it
though,
worthwhile, doesn't it?
even though I wanted to kill half of them, it's like, oh God, but it makes it worth it because the challenges with students is they think they know it all, which is as a film professional drives you insane. But eventually they see you just got to keep showing up week after week and showing them and then showing them in their own work as we learn with our own work. Oh, this doesn't work. Why? Okay, here's the lesson. Here's the lesson. Here's the lesson. Here's the lesson. And if they stick with it, most of them do, and stick with it and go through the process, they become better filmmakers. And they see that. They see that evolution, in a semester, which is great.
What's your take on the industry now? And I mean, do you have any concerns for the challenges they're going to be facing?
I have a lot of concerns, man. It seems like with the consolidation of a lot of these companies, it seems like work is drying up a little bit. That's what I've been hearing.
Mhm.
Obviously with the introduction of AI, at our teacher retreat, that was what the whole retreat was about, was how do we incorporate AI into what we're teaching them and how do we use that in our own work. So it's going to change a lot of stuff. I mean, still to be determined exactly how, but it definitely is.
Yeah.
Uh,
Have you thought about on a creative level how AI might be incorporated?
yeah,
Especially in documentaries, I'm very interested to hear.
I think the most basic thing is, with the whole text to video feature, I downloaded an app called Runway. I think it's called
Yeah.
Runway Studios, where you just type in text. And for now, for dots, it's a lot of B-roll. So if I need I type in something like 70s Bronx Street, and it comes up and it gives me
Yeah.
that image. So okay, how can I, instead of going to Getty Images or something like that, or Getty Video licensing footage, I can create it. Or if I need to, if I need footage, I can create it. So that's for the documentary aspect. That's one thing. I think we might see AI automate a lot more of the AE tasks, which is scary because then that's going to put a lot of people out of work. I haven't quite seen it yet, but I'm assuming it's coming. So
Well, hopefully we still have a job in 10 years
hopefully,
because, I want to keep seeing what you're going to be doing next. And I'm very interested to see what you're going to direct next. I mean, this is like
yeah,
a
yeah, man.
new venture. Any interest in doing anything scripted, or are you really documentary guy?
I've kind of, given up the dream a little bit. I definitely want to do something scripted, but like I mentioned earlier, there's a path. It's the same thing as me breaking into editing or breaking into directing. I have to have a clear plan. That plan might have to be, I might just have to shoot a narrative on my own, an independent narrative, and then show it around, show people. So
no matter what you do, I'm just really excited to see it. I'm really
thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Really into this film, and your whole journey, your whole story is really inspiring, and I'm sure it's going to inspire a lot of people. So thank you so much for being part of it.
Thank you for having me. I enjoy doing this.